The cottage that wasn't. I thought I was visiting my grandparents for the first time at their cottage, but it turned out that the place wasn't theirs, and they weren't my grandparents. I'd been hearing about my grandparents' cottage for years. When I arrived, the cottage looked just like the pictures. It was charming and old, tucked away in the middle of nowhere. I didn't know what to expect, but when I knocked on the door, I was greeted by a woman I thought was my grandmother. She looked just like the photos I'd seen of her when I was little. She smiled and gave me a warm hug. The man who greeted me shortly after seemed to be my grandpa, tall with kind eyes and a firm handshake. They both seemed so familiar, so welcoming. But something felt off. Their voices were too smooth, their smiles just a bit too wide. I didn't think much of it at the time, chalking it up to nerves and the long drive. That first night, they told me stories about my childhood, stories I didn't remember, but that seemed oddly accurate. Grandma mentioned specific moments I had no recollection of, like how I used to be afraid of the dark. Grandpa laughed and shared how I'd always been a quiet child who loved to watch the birds outside. I felt comforted, but there was this nagging feeling of unease that wouldn't go away. The cottage itself felt wrong. The air was thick with dust, but there was something else, something more unsettling. The walls were covered with old pictures, mostly of people I didn't recognize. Some were black and white, some in color, but all had the same strange quality. No one ever seemed to look directly at the camera. Instead, they stared off to the side, as if watching something just beyond the frame. One evening, while walking through the hallway, I stopped in front of a large portrait. It was a picture of me, except it wasn't a photo I'd ever seen. I was sitting in the same room, wearing clothes I didn't own, with a look on my face I didn't recognize. It was like someone had captured me here long before I'd even arrived. That's when the dread set in. The longer I stayed, the more the little things became unsettling. My grandparents kept calling me by a different name. Their smiles grew more intense. I overheard them talking in the kitchen one night. I thought they were just planning the next day, but then I heard my name. I leaned closer and caught a fragment of their conversation. "It's time." My blood ran cold. The people I thought were my grandparents weren't. They were imposters, and my real grandparents had been gone for years, long before I was born. The horrifying truth hit me. These imposters had been using my grandparents' identities to lure people in, trapping them in the cottage for years. And I was the next one they planned to replace. The boat that never came back. You think you know someone, but you have no idea what they've been hiding. Not until the boat never came back. It was supposed to be a simple fishing trip. My uncle had invited me to join him on a weekend getaway at a remote lake, a place I'd never been. He'd been there before, and I thought it would be a perfect way to bond. The lake was far from town, surrounded by thick trees. Just the two of us out in nature, what could go wrong? We spent the first few hours fishing and talking. The air was cool, and the water was calm, with nothing but the sound of birds overhead. But something felt off. My uncle was quieter than usual, his eyes darting to the shoreline now and then. I tried to brush it off, figuring he was just focused on fishing. But then, as the afternoon went on, we started having trouble with the boat. The engine sputtered, then died, completely. My uncle immediately got to work trying to fix it, but no matter what he did, it wouldn't start. The lake was silent except for the occasional ripple. My uncle's movements grew more frantic, and I began to feel a sinking feeling in my stomach. "Uncle, what's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't answer at first. His face was pale, and his hands shook as he tried the engine again. "Don't worry," he said finally, but there was no conviction in his voice. That's when I started to hear it, the rustling from the trees. It wasn't the wind. Someone, or something, was moving through the woods, closing in on us. I looked around, my heart racing, but I couldn't see anything. My uncle kept glancing nervously toward the shore. "Uncle, what is it?" I asked again, my voice cracking. He turned to me, his eyes wide with fear. "We're not alone," he whispered. We never were. Then it hit me. I remembered the stories he'd told me as a child about people vanishing around these woods. The disappearances. How anyone who got stranded on the lake at night was never seen again. Suddenly, I understood. The boat wasn't going to start. We weren't meant to leave. I thought my stepdad was normal, until I found what he was hiding in the attic. You won't believe what I found in the attic of my new house. I'm still trying to process it, and I honestly don't know what to do with this information. I moved in with my mom and stepdad about 6 months ago. We bought an old house that needed a lot of work. The first few weeks were fine, but then I started hearing noises at night, scratching, shuffling, like something or someone was moving around upstairs. My mom always said it was just the house settling, but it felt like more than that. One evening, I decided to look around the attic. I was convinced there was something up there, maybe a rodent or something. I wasn't expecting to find what I did. I made my way into the attic, and it was covered in dust and old furniture. There was an old wardrobe in the corner, and something about it just felt off. I started poking around, moving things around, when I noticed a small trapdoor in the floor. My heart started racing, but I was too curious to stop. I pried it open, revealing a hidden compartment below. Inside, there was a large, locked box. My hand shook as I opened it. What I found inside made my stomach churn. There were clothes, blood-stained clothes. Jewelry. And then, there were photographs. Photos of women, smiling, laughing, all taken in places I recognized from around town. But the most horrifying part was the way the photos were arranged. Some were faded, others were torn, and they were all pinned in a way that seemed almost personal. I felt sick to my stomach. The photos weren't the only things in the box. There were small trinkets, hair ties, rings, even a locket. Each piece seemed to hold a piece of someone's life. I couldn't believe it. It didn't make sense at first. My stepdad? The man I thought I knew? The man who was always so kind and loving? He was hiding something terrible. I confronted him that night. He didn't deny it. He just stared at me with this cold, empty look and said, "You're the last one. You'll understand soon." I don't know what he meant by that. All I know is, I need to get out of here. I'm scared of what I'll find next.